quickly, this is who I am. I've already had a great introduction, so I won't dwell on it, but just want to say that being an author and an editor and a publisher, I have seen the industry from all sides. And I think I can bring a unique perspective of still being active, both as an author and until very, very recently as a publisher. I'm just stepping down from my role as the publisher at Promontory to focus on my own writing and also to be an author coach and a ghostwriter with Cascadia Author Services. But as I talk today, just remember that I'm coming at this from a lot of hard-earned experience on both sides of this industry. And I welcome questions along the way. If you just want to type it into the chat box, I'll answer them as best as I can, either in the moment or I'll answer them when I get to that point in my presentation. So by all means, I encourage questions. I realize that some of this can be a little odd if you're seeing it for the first time. I'd like to start by just talking about who's who in publishing and who are the different players that you really need to think about. The first, of course, is the authors. Now, this is very familiar to all of you. You will probably know a lot of authors, and the authors are the most important part of the publishing industry because the authors are the ones who create the content that gets pushed out by the industry. So you might think that the authors hold a lot of the cards, you know, being the talent. Unfortunately, it's not really how it works. Mostly this is because of numbers. There are so many authors or aspiring authors compared to how many agents and publishers and bookstores there are, that the industry has the luxury of being able to be very choosy. And writing is a great profession. It's a great hobby. It's a great calling that so many of us just feel compelled to do, that there's no shortage of new authors who are trying to break in. And so that creates this weird imbalance where, as an author, you often will feel like you are the least important person in the room, when in fact you are the most important. So before I go along and explain the whole industry, I just want to reiterate that to you as the authors. You are the most important part of all this. And without the authors, there is no publishing industry. So always remember that. The first part of the industry that most authors will come across are the agents. Now, if you've ever had the chance to pitch to an agent, perhaps you've gone to a conference where they're allowing agents to sit down and they'll receive your pitch, or if you've submitted to agents along the way, you may feel like the author-agent relationship is an adversarial one. And it sometimes feels like that when you're first talking to an agent for the first time, because you're trying to convince them that you're worth paying attention to. And agents are very often busy, overwhelmed, stressed, tired, and not always on their A game when they're talking to the 27th author of the day. So I want to make it clear that agents are actually your best friend. In the publishing industry, the author and the agent work together. It may take some time to get an agent, but once you have an agent, your agent is your best friend. The agent is the person who represents the author to the industry. The agent is a professional in the industry who understands who's who and what's what, and what editor is looking for your kind of book, and what publishing house is struggling right now, what publishing house is expanding, what are the trends. It's the agent's job to know all this stuff. The agent also will know all about contracts and how to write a good contract for you, the author. And so they will know all that arcane publishing knowledge that you as the author may not know. And that's okay, because that's their job. And you know that they're on your side because agents get paid a percentage of what you get paid. It's usually 10 to 15%. If ever an agent wants you to pay them money beforehand, then walk away, because that's not what an agent does. If an agent charges things like a reading fee or some kind of upfront fee that you'll make back later, no, that's not how it works. You don't pay an agent anything. It's the publisher who pays the agent the money. And that's good for you because it means that you and the agent are fully aligned in wanting to secure a deal that gets the most money possible, because the agent gets paid a percentage of whatever you get paid. So you as the author and the agent are good friends, and you guys will work together as a team to take on the rest of the industry. The next main player is the publishers. This is where I've spent the last 10 years. The publishers are, in a sense, the linchpin of the industry, because the publishers are the ones who actually make the books. They take the intellectual property of the author and then they edit it, and they do the cover design and they do the typesetting, and they actually physically create the book and the ebook and the audiobook that are going to be sold to the public. The publisher takes what is your talent and turns it into a product which can actually be sold to the public. And the publisher is the one who carries the financial burden here. And I'll go into that in more detail in a minute. But the publisher is sort of the great transformer in this industry, in that they take something which is really just an idea and turn it into something tangible to then give to the public or sell to the public. Now, the distributors, this is a group that you may not have heard about. They tend to hide in the shadows, but they are very important. The distributors, these are the companies that stand between the publisher and the bookstores. You might think that the publishers just send their books directly to bookstores. And as a publisher, I would just say, okay, Barnes & Noble, here are my books for this year, put them on the shelves. Unfortunately, that's not how it works. I wish it was. The distributors are big, big companies that represent the publishers. And so you'll have maybe 200 publishers or more that are being supported by one distributor. And it's the distributor who then talks to the bookstores and says, okay, these are the books that I have for this season. These are the ones I recommend you put on the shelves. And so as a publisher, I don't talk to the bookstores directly. I have to go through my distributor, which means that now that I've signed this book, I've worked with the author, I've grappled with the agent, we've edited, we've designed, we've produced this book, it's finished. I now have to make a sales pitch to my distributor that this is the book I think you should carry. And remember, I'm just one of 200 publishers that this distributor represents. So I'm competing against all those other publishers for the distributor's attention, because the distributor cannot pitch all of the books from all of the publishers every season. They have to make their own short list. So I have to push my best books to be on the distributor's short list. The distributor then meets with the national book buyers or with the independent bookstore owners, and then they pitch what they think their picks are. And the bookstores will pick some of them, not all of them. So as we look at this list of main players, as the author, you need to realize that every one of these players is a gateway that you have to get your book through. First, you have to convince an agent to represent you. Then they have to convince a publisher to sign you. Then the publisher has to convince the distributor to make this book one of their shortlist. And then on that shortlist, the distributor has to convince the bookstore to actually put the book on the shelf. So there are a lot of barriers between a book being signed and a book actually making it onto bookstore shelves, because these are the different players, and they all want to make money. They all want to support the best book, but unfortunately it's very subjective. So they just have to use their best judgment. The supporting players are ones you'll probably be familiar with as well. The editors. Now, every publisher will have editors on staff, and you will work with your editor to refine the manuscript and get it ready. Publishers will also have designers on staff. They're the ones who create the cover and create the interior of the book and create the ebook. Sometimes, depending on the publisher, sometimes you as the author will have a say in your cover design. Sometimes you won't. At Promontory, we always involve the author in our cover design, but it's important to remember too that, and I had to make this very clear, that the author does not have a veto on the cover. The publisher does, because ultimately it's the publisher's money that is supporting this book. Plus, we are the experts. We're the industry experts, and so we know what the trends are. We know what the bookstores are expecting. We know what looks good. And so we want our author to be happy, and we want our author to love their cover, but ultimately we have to be the one to make the ultimate choice. Printers are something that they're not part of the publisher themselves, but we work with printers all the time, and we get through the process to make the physical book. Marketing and publicists, this is kind of an interesting relationship. Some publishers will have marketing people on staff. My experience as an author is that those marketing people are very busy, And as an author, I will have their full attention for about 6 weeks before book launch. But then as soon as my book launches, the marketing people have moved on to the next month's books, and I no longer exist. So the marketing people are usually overworked and harried, and they have a few standard things that they do. As an author looking to get into the traditional publishing industry, I do recommend that if you have the means, take a serious look at working with an editor before you submit your book to a publisher or to an agent, because professional editors exist. I know that through SouthWest Writers, you can find some great ones. It is worth the money to put in that extra effort to be able to make sure your book is as good as it can be before you submit. Likewise, at the other end, marketing and publicists, it's not a bad idea to consider talking to a marketing person or a publicist before you submit your traditional book, because publishers and bookstores, they want to hear what kind of marketing is going to be doing to support this book. Publishers don't have a lot of resources to do a lot of marketing, except if it's a blockbuster. But for your typical first-time author, you won't get a lot of support, and you'll be kind of expected to do it on your own. And marketing takes time, so I recommend that you start building your marketing presence before, sorry, I'm just looking at the questions here, before you even submit. The difference between marketing and publicists, it's kind of a gray area between which is which. Publicists traditionally deal with the, I guess you call it the old media, the newspapers, the TVs. They'll be the ones to try and get you interviews. They'll be the ones to get you like a story written about you in traditional media. Marketers, I suppose, if we want to make a distinction, are more to do with online, how to promote yourself online, how to blog effectively, how to do good Facebook ads. But really, the two terms are interchangeable. I'm just seeing a question here about Spanish books in the USA. I'm gonna say off the bat, I don't know a lot about that. I'm not really an expert, so I'm sorry. I'm gonna have to pass on that question about Spanish books. Sorry. So those are just the players that you're dealing with in the publishing industry. I want to zero in right now on the actual publishers themselves and what their publishing model is. Now, when I first took over at Promontory, and we were trucking along for a little while, and small press looking to grow, and I thought maybe I should look at some outside investment. Maybe we could get some investors in to help Promontory. So I put on my MBA hat, and I tried to build the case for how would I pitch Promontory as a traditional publisher to investors. And I discovered, with my business hat on, that in fact, the publishing business model is the stupidest business model in the world. It really is. Here's what it is. As a publisher, I will pay you, the author, upfront for your intellectual property. I will then spend a lot of money doing development and editing and design and making this into a product that I can sell. I then have to pitch this product, not even to the stores, and certainly not to the public, but to my distributor, and hope that they might think that this book is worth passing on to the stores and so on. And even if I do get the book into stores, I now have to spend a lot more money to print and ship these books, the physical copies, to the stores. Even if it gets on bookstore shelves, it might get returned later on, which means if it's on the bookstore shelf and it's not selling, the bookstore can return it for a full credit. So even though I've made a sale, it's not really a sale. It's never really a sale. And I found myself really scratching my head as to how does this work? And how do we as publishers actually make money? Because it is the publisher who is carrying all the costs. As the author, you don't have to pay anything. In fact, the publisher will pay you. The agent doesn't have to pay anything. They're getting paid by the publisher. The distributor does carry some costs, but a lot of them they push to the publisher, and they do everything they can to minimize their risk. The bookstores have some costs, but they have the advantage of, if a book isn't making them enough money, they just return it and they get their money back from what they paid. So there's this whole game of returns, which I'll talk about more in a little bit. But ultimately, it comes back to the publisher. So the publisher is the one carrying all the financial risk. And so if, as an author, you're wondering, why are publishers so grumpy all the time? And why won't a publisher take a risk? Because that's often the thing. We say as publishers, we're looking for the next best thing. We're looking for new and fresh. Yeah, but very often publishers just want more of the same. That sold well. Okay, well, I want more of those. Or that sold well for another publisher. Give me some of that. Because we often, like any other industry, we often chase trends. And we can be very conservative because we do know what works. And we know this kind of book is a solid seller. Let's just have more of these books. It can be very, very hard for us to break out with something truly revolutionary because we don't want to lose our shirts. So we were talking about it during the business meeting earlier about how most authors we're artists and we like to live in the world of art. We don't often like to think of the grubby business of money, but unfortunately with publishers, that's where they have to live because they're the ones shelling the money out. They have to be able to make sure they're getting at least some money coming back in. So it is a very odd business and it's really skewed in a strange way. There's an awful lot of risk that the publisher is carrying every time they publish a book. And as a rule of thumb, for every one book that succeeds, we'll have 9 that fail. And we just hope that that one book that succeeds will pay for the other 9. And that's kind of how it works. So let's talk about submissions. And when you want to get ready to submit to an agent or a small press, what should you be looking for and what are we looking for? So the first question often is, do you need an agent? If you're going to be submitting to one of the big 5 in New York or any of the big publishers, yes, you will need an agent. The big 5 in New York won't even look at unagented submissions. It used to be in the old days, there was what was called a slush pile, where if they got unsolicited manuscripts, they just sort of put them on that pile and some junior editor would eventually get to them. And they would occasionally find some pure gold in that slush pile. But publishers don't have as many people on staff anymore, and they're feeling the squeeze like everybody else. And so nowadays, if you want to submit to the big 5, then you have to have an agent. If you're going to submit to a small press, perhaps a local press, a regional press, often then you don't need an agent and you can deal with them directly. If you do wind up getting an offer from a small press, you might want to consider getting yourself an agent at that point, just to make sure that the contract that you're being offered is a good contract. I know as an author, the first time I signed a deal, I was so excited. Yeah, I'll sign it. I'll sign anything. And that's why you want to have an agent there to make sure that you are not signing away your life or your firstborn child. Or more seriously, that you're not signing away any rights that you really don't want to sign away. So it is always a good idea to have an agent. And I encourage all of you, if you're shopping your manuscript around, to start with agents. They can open doors to more publishers for you. And also they're on your side and they will help you out and make sure that you don't sign any bad deals. That said, sometimes, depending on what you're writing, you may not want to go for a big publisher. If you are writing a book that is regionally focused or has a really niche market that it's only going to really appeal to this small group of people, a small press might be the better place to go. Small presses tend to really carve out little areas of specialization for themselves. And if you can find a small press that specializes in the kind of book that you're writing, you might actually do well with them because they're going to be so relieved to be getting a book that actually fits their guidelines. So particularly regional and particularly for if it's a very, very refined topic, a small press might be a better bet than a big publisher. And when you are looking at any publisher, when you're looking to submit, make sure that you are submitting to the right genre. Every publisher will have on their submissions page a clear set of rules for what they're looking for. They may say that we accept this kind of book. We do not accept this kind of book. I personally am a science fiction writer, and so I would often see in submission pages, we do not accept genre fiction, science fiction, fantasy, horror, westerns, you know, okay, fine, they're not the publisher for me, and at least they've told me that, so I'm not wasting anybody's time. So do make sure you do your homework and make sure that you are submitting to the right publisher. They will say what they're looking for, what they're not looking for. If you have a book that doesn't really fit any of those requirements, then by all means, submit and see what you think. How do you locate the right small publisher? Well, writers groups can often be a great place to start because they will often be plugged into their local scene. There are publisher associations. I don't know, I mean, every state will be different, but I know up where I live, we do have a local association of book publishers that has a website, which is fairly easy to find. And so for anyone who is writing up in my corner of the country, they know that they can, with a quick Google search, you'll find, the Association of Publishers, and you'll see the list of all of the publisher websites from there. So very often we do group ourselves into regional groups. National publisher associations as well may often have lists of publishers. It is a lot easier these days, and I guess my short answer is Google, but I don't want to be glib. If you look for publisher associations, if you can talk to writers groups, people who are in the know, they can often steer you in the right direction. Above all, check the submission rules when you're submitting to a publisher. If we say that we want a query letter no longer than 1 page and a synopsis of no more than 3 pages and the first 3 chapters, then give us exactly that. Don't bend the rules, because we, remember, are getting a lot of submissions. We cannot take them all. And if we get an author who's not obeying our simple rules, that's probably mean we're just going to toss the submission and go on. It sounds brutal, it sounds cruel, it sounds unfair, but you just have to remember, from our side, we have lots of people coming to us. And also, especially at a small press, we have to work with this author. We have to work with this author for a year or 2 to get this book together. If you don't follow our basic submission rules, that's a red flag to us that maybe you won't take editing well. Maybe you'll argue over the cover. Maybe you won't listen to us. Maybe you won't do what we need you to do, right? We don't know. And because there are so many authors for us to choose from, then we're just going to move on to the next author. So it's a simple thing. Just make sure that you follow the rules for submissions. And it's not that we're jerks. It's just that we're really busy. And we want to make sure that we find an author who we think we can work well with. Okay, so when you're writing your query letter, I do recommend that you keep them very simple. Query letters are not a description of the entire book. They're not your life story. They're not all your reasons for why you think this book is amazing. They are just the first pass for us as the publisher to look at and see whether this is the kind of thing we're looking for. So I recommend 4 paragraphs, just a basic intro, a synopsis, which very briefly outlines the book. And by outlining the book, it tells me what genre is this book, what is the main purpose of this book, what's the point that you're making with this book. And then for paragraph 3, if you have some kind of relevant experience that will help with the book, then add it there. For example, if you're writing a book about spaceflight, and even it's a fictional book, about near future spaceflight, but you happen to work for NASA, tell us that. We want to know that, because that's really good experience. It tells us you probably know what you're talking about, but it also helps us when we think about marketing. How can we market this author? Okay, this author works for NASA and they're writing about spaceflight. That's easy. And it's okay if you don't have anything to put in paragraph 3. For presence, what I mean, is if you already have a large social media following, or you already have a big mailing list, that sort of thing, it just tells us you are someone who's already put yourself out there, who's already built a name for yourself, and we're immediately thinking we can sell your book to all those people. So if you have either of those things, let us know really briefly. If you don't, that's totally okay. And I understand most authors are just normal folks who like writing, and they've written a book and it's great, but it's their first book and they haven't done a lot of marketing and they just have a normal job, and that's totally okay. So if you have nothing to put in paragraph 3, it's not a mark against you. It's just, if you do have something for paragraph 3, be sure to tell us in the query letter, because we want to know that right out of the gate. And then paragraph 4, just conclude very quickly, very professionally. Remember at this point that this is the beginning of a business relationship. You love your book. Your book is everything. You're passionate about your book. And hopefully we will one day be as well. But at this point, we're not. We don't know you yet, and we don't know your book yet. So you have to show to us that you can be professional and just, you know, we're just having a conversation here. So the whole tone of the query letter needs to be that way, and try and keep it to 1 page. Sorry, I have trouble moving. There we go. On our side, once we look at the submission process, this is how we break it down. At Promontory, there were 3 of us on the submission panel, but at bigger publishers, there'll be more people. It'll be more diverse. There usually will be, at any publisher, there will be a submissions editor, who's usually a senior editor, who is the one who the agents talk to and is the one who takes the first look at the samples. And what this is, they'll read the query letter. If they've asked for a synopsis, they'll read that. And then they're going to want to read, be it the first 3 chapters, the first 50 pages, whatever it is they've asked for, as a sample of the writing. And at this point, they're looking for, is this the kind of book that we are interested in? Okay, yes. Synopsis of the book, okay, that's my interest. And then the writing sample, because the writing sample is ultimately the most important thing. If you're a good writer, we're going to see that. If you're not a good writer, we're going to see that too. If you've already been through an agent, I'm pretty confident that you will be a good writer, because the agent will make sure that you are. If you've put in the time and the effort and perhaps got some editing help beforehand, I'm confident you'll be a good writer. And we'll see that. At that point, because we're looking at a lot of submissions, the first pass, be it the submissions editor or whoever it is, will be pretty quick and going, yes, no, I'll come back to that one. Yes, no, I'll come back to that one. And there's going to be a lot more no's than there are yeses and maybes. But once they've done that, then they'll look at the yeses, they'll look at the maybes again, you know, compare, and maybe add 1 or 2 from the maybes into the yes pile. The yes pile, we will then contact you or your agent and ask to see the complete manuscript. It used to be in the old days that authors would only write the first 5 chapters of a book, and they would submit that. You can still occasionally get away with that. I confess, I did with my latest series. I only wrote the first 5 chapters, and we submitted that, and we were able to sign a deal based on that. But I was also an established author by then, with a pretty high-powered New York agent who everyone's afraid of, including myself. So I had a bit of an advantage there. If you're a first-time author, I don't recommend that. I recommend that you write the entire manuscript. The only exception is if you're writing a nonfiction book, which is going to require a lot of research. In that case, it's perfectly acceptable if you're writing nonfiction to just put together a proposal and a writing sample. And then once you get approved, then you can go and invest and do all the time to do the research to write the whole thing. But at this point, we are asking you for a complete manuscript. We will read the entire manuscript. And often stories will start strong, but then the author can't hold it together for a whole novel. You know, there's a saggy middle or a never-ending ending, or it just doesn't come together the way we like. At that point, a bunch more of the manuscripts will wind up on the no pile, and we'll have a very small number of contenders. At this point, the manuscript will have gone through 2 editors. So even at a small press, I want to assure you that it isn't all just on the opinion of one person. Once we're past the first pass, anything that we want to see the complete manuscript, there will be more than one editor involved. So you will have multiple viewpoints weighing in on this. When we get after the second review and we have our contenders, that's when, at Promontory anyway, I as the publisher would get involved, and I would be briefed on the books. I might read some of them if I'm particularly interested, but we would discuss as a team which are the submissions that we're going to actually make an offer to. At that point, it becomes the author negotiations, where we, as the publisher, will make an offer to either you directly or to your agent, and we'll offer, usually the negotiations involve an advance, which is a bunch of money that we will pay you up front. We usually won't pay you all of it up front. Let's say the advance is $10,000. We'll pay you $5,000 now, and then we'll pay you $5,000 when we accept your manuscript, which means after we've taken it, we've done all of our editing, you've done your reworking, we've done editing again, you've done reworking, and we've all agreed that this is the final version which is going to print. Then we pay you. That's called acceptance, and then we pay you the rest of your advance. A note on advances. I remember my agent telling me way back at the beginning that he considered it his job to get me, as the author, the biggest advance that he could, because he said most advances are the only money that you're ever going to see for this book, because most books do not sell enough to pay out the advance. What the advance is, it's an advance on royalties, which means that you as the author get 10% of every sale of the book. So if your book sells for $20, you as the author will get $2, to just keep it simple. Give you $2 from every book. Now, if you've already been paid $10,000 in your advance, you're going to have to sell 5,000 copies of that book at $2 each to pay out the advance. So if you sell more than 5,000 copies, you've now paid out the advance. You will then start to receive royalty checks in the future for further sales. The thing is, though, most books do not ever pay out their advance. And so the agent's job is to get you the biggest advance possible based on the potential of what this book could sell. So if your agent is pushing for a bigger advance, just go with it, because most books don't pay out their advance. For short story submissions, this is a little outside the traditional publishing world that I'm talking about, which is books. Short stories are generally for magazines, and magazines, they go through a similar process of what I've described here. And usually a magazine will say, we're looking for this kind of short story, this length, this topic, and you write to that, you submit, and then it goes through the same process that I've described here, except of course it being a short story, they'll read the whole thing at the start. But otherwise it's the same. Short stories for magazines, they don't usually pay very much, but that's okay. You're not usually doing it for the money, you're doing it to build your credits as an author. In the traditional world, short story anthologies are not done all that often with first-time authors. They are occasionally, but most of the time anthologies that are brought out are done because they're chock full of big names in the industry. I was lucky enough to be in an anthology with Titan, and they had some amazing science fiction authors in that book, who had submitted stories, to the point where I laughed and said, wow, this anthology has every top science fiction author from the last 50 years and me. And I was lucky in that, because I was sort of an up-and-coming author with Titan at the time, they included me in that anthology, and it was a great vehicle to increase my exposure a bit. But I have no illusions that anybody bought that anthology because my name was on it, and Titan didn't produce that anthology because of my name. They had George R R Martin, and they had Silverberg, and they had Orson Scott Card, and they had all these big names, and then there were a few others like me that were just kind of thrown in to fill in the blanks. If there's a deficit between the advance and the book sales, no, the author does not have to pay back the publisher. The publisher agrees to the advance, and you will get that money. That's part of the financial risk that the publisher carries, that if the book does not pay out its advance, well, that's just money that the publisher is not going to get back. The good thing for the publisher is that we only pay the author 10% of the revenue, which means the other 90% we keep. So we don't have to sell, in my example, 5,000 copies of a book to make back our money, but we have to sell 5,000 for the author to pay out their advance. So it's all part of the financial risk game that we play. Most authors will get a relatively small advance if they're unknown, unless their book is really exciting and has a lot of potential behind it. But no, to answer your question, you as the author never have to pay back your advance to the publisher. The only time that would ever happen is if you somehow defaulted on your contract and did not deliver the book. Like if you walked away from it and or just whatever, then you would have to pay back because you didn't complete your part of the contract. But as long as you deliver a book that they accept, you're good to go. So as a publisher, what are we looking for in a submission? Above all, quality writing. I know that all of you at some time or another have read a traditionally published book that comes across to you as absolute junk. And how on earth did this thing get published? And I can't answer that question. I don't know. Probably it's an established author who already has a big following and is probably already on contract, and it's their 7th book in a series and they're getting tired. Then, that could be why. Sometimes it's a celebrity who's written a book or had a book ghost written, and the publisher really doesn't care how good it is because they know they're going to sell 100,000 copies of it. But those are rare. Those are the exceptions. And every publisher is looking for top quality writing. That is what we want. Above all is top quality writing. That is the minimum requirement, is top quality writing. Above that, we are also looking for market potential. Is this book written in a market that has a lot of readership? So is there a big market here? Or alternatively, is there a really devout readership here? For example, in science fiction, there's a subclass called steampunk, which there's not a lot of people who read steampunk nonfiction, but those that do love it and they will just gobble it up. And so if I'm a science fiction publisher and I get a steampunk submission, which is really well written, okay, I might be able to go with this because I know that those readers are going to grab this. So market potential can mean a couple of different things. And then finally, we look for professionalism in the author. If we get to the point where we are considering making an offer to an author, I personally have developed a little test just that I throw, because I'm retiring from publishing, I can tell you this, but whenever we would make an offer and I would want to talk to the author, ideally I'd talk to them on the phone if I can, just to get a sense of who they are. And I would say to them, I love your book, really like it, fascinating, but I think we're going to change the title. And I just want to see how they react. Because if the author says, oh, okay, well, I mean, I like the title, but hey, you guys know best, so I'm happy to work with you. Good, we can work together. But I have had authors who will basically, go to the mat wrestling over their title because they've worked so hard on that title and that title means everything. And that is just, it's a red flag to me, again, that you're emotionally involved in this, and that's fine, I expect you to be. But if you are going to argue with me over the title, are you going to argue with me over every single little detail that we want to change? Because in my early days, we did come across a few authors who would basically not accept any changes to their books. And we had to get rid of them because we can't work with someone like that. So we're looking for professionalism in the author. And again, I know that sounds harsh, and I'm sorry, because I am an author myself, and I can get mad when my editor wants to make changes. And it's okay to debate. It's okay to stand up for what you believe. You don't have to be a pushover, but as long as you're willing to talk about it, that's all I'm looking for as for professionalism in the author. You should stand up for why you did something. If you can explain to me why it has to be this way, and it makes sense, okay, you're the author, it's your book, we'll go with it. But if you're arguing just cause, that's a different story. So I'm not going to dwell on that anymore, but that is something that we are looking for. But just to reiterate again, quality writing. That is the first thing we need, is quality writing. So that's the submission process. I'm going to move on now to the sales process to help let you understand how it works. Once you've finished working on your book and you've handed it off and they've designed the cover, and then you hear nothing for a year from the publisher, this is what's going on. Absolutely, you can submit with a working title. Titles are really hard. I know personally as an author, I struggle with them a lot, and I usually get my agent to help me come up with even the working title. Every now and then I'll get inspired and I'll have a really good reason why I like a title, but often I don't. Some authors are very good at it, but as long as you're open to it, and if you're not sure, then yeah, just give it a working title. And you can even say right underneath working title. That way they know that you're not hard over on that title, especially if it's not a great one. And they go, okay, good, we can revisit that and come back for a title. As publishers, we're very understanding of that. The less attached to a title an author is, the happier we are, just in case we have to change it. So the sales process of what we do as publishers, once we've finished your book and we are now trying to pitch it to the world. First thing you have to understand is there are very long timelines. People talk about how the publishing industry works at a glacial pace, and how as an author, you will have to wait months to hear from your editor. Now, inevitably, when you do hear from them, they need you to turn it around in 24 hours because they're desperately behind and they have a deadline to meet, et cetera, et cetera. But one of the pressures we have as publishers is the very long timelines. And this is, you'll notice here, it starts 8 months before launch. We have to have the book finished. So the book is fully edited and proofed and typeset with a cover finished, put together with publishing packet or publicity package ready to go. 8 months before launch. And that is because we have to then send it out printed copies, which are called ARCs, advanced reader copies, which we send out to other authors in the genre, to notables in the industry, to people who we want to give us endorsements and reviews on the book, which we can then put into our pitches to the stores, but also put on the cover and inside. And all those reviews that you see, those were all done 6 months before launch. So we have to have a finished book ready to go and send it out and allow for 2 months for people to read the book and get back to us. And so we can build that thing. And we need to do it that far back because the national bookstores require us to make our sales pitches 4 months before launch. And so at 4 months before launch, we need to have not only a book, but we have to have some early reviews, like from Publishers Weekly. We have to have some endorsements from authors in the same genre. We have to have all that put together because we have to pitch to our distributor, who then pitches to the stores, why this book is amazing. It's brilliantly written. We all know that. That's a given that the book is brilliantly written. But what's special about this book? You know, who says this book is amazing? You know, again, keeping with science fiction, if I can get, let's say fantasy, fantasy, if I can get George R. R. Martin to say that this book is amazing, that carries a lot of weight. If you're in horror and Stephen King says that this is the best book he's ever read, you know, we want that stuff. And that is what sets your book aside. And that's what sets your book more likely in the short list for your distributor and on the one that's going to get on bookstore shelves. We pitch to the national bookstores 4 months prior, the indie bookstores 3 months prior. And then 1 month before launch is when we do our big promotional push. Now, this is something I personally don't agree with the publishing industry, because basic business tells you that yes, you might want to do some promotion before the launch of a product, but you really want to do your promotion after the launch of the product, when the product is actually available to be bought. But that's not how the industry works in publishing. We do all of our promotion up to launch. And then as soon as the book launches, we're done. We've moved on to next month's books, because now we got to do the same thing with them. And that's just what the industry expects. It's what the bookstores expect. It's what the distributors expect. I, you know, as a maverick small press, tried to mess with that, and it just didn't work. So, all right. So I got beaten down to do the industry standards. But all of this adds up to a very long lead time, which is why when you sign a deal with a publisher, you're probably signing it 2 years before the book is actually going to hit bookstore shelves. That is one of the big criticisms of traditional publishing these days, is how long it takes, especially because with self-publishing, books can be published so much faster. That's a topic for another day, but this is why traditional publishing takes so long, is because we are doing all this stuff in the background that you as the author aren't really seeing, but it's essential to get your book onto the shelves. And remember that we are up against fierce competition. We have to pitch to our distributor, and then the distributor has to take its favorites and then pitch to the national bookstores. And every store is worried about Amazon these days. And ebooks have been a real game changer. I personally like ebooks. As a publisher, I love ebooks because they cost nothing to produce and to sell. I don't have to print them, I don't have to store them, I don't have to ship them, there are no returns. Ebooks are amazing, but they're also only about 20% of the market. So print is still king, and this whole process I've been describing is still very much where we focus all of our attention. Ebooks are just kind of like a nice icing on the cake, and almost like free revenue for us, which we love. But Amazon is also putting a squeeze on all of the bookstores. And so bookstore shelf space is getting more and more competitive because they want blockbusters and nothing but blockbusters. Audiobooks are really interesting in that they're making a tremendous comeback. Audiobooks have always existed, but in the early 21st century, they were very much on the decline, and we basically didn't even worry about them. They were just going to disappear. With the rise of podcasts, though, a lot of people like to listen again. And so audiobooks have had quite a resurgence, and it's all digital now. You know, you don't have the old cassette tapes anymore. It's just a file you download. So audiobooks are making a resurgence. They are very different from the rest of this process, though, because whereas we're dealing with words, like written words, with print books and with the ebooks, it's just a matter of converting files. Audiobooks, you now need to get voice actors to come in and narrate the book. So it's a very different step. Not every publisher will do it. Most small presses won't do it. Promontory doesn't do audiobooks. Every time we looked at audiobooks and we realized how much it cost to produce an audiobook, because you got to pay for the studio and pay for the narrator, we just realized it just didn't make any business sense. The bigger publishers will do audiobooks, and again, with the rise of podcasts and just the improvement in technology, audiobooks are on the rise again. So yeah, they're definitely a piece of this. They are just a completely separate piece because the way that we make them is very different from how we make print and ebooks. Do I think COVID will change the industry? Absolutely, it already has. COVID decimated the industry a few months ago when the lockdown first happened. All the bookstores closed, so the primary means which we sell our product disappeared. Also, Amazon, because it was so overwhelmed, said that it was prioritizing emergency products that it was going to be shipping. Books were not on that, and so the book orders went way down Amazon's priority list. And so you may have noticed over the last few months, if you try to order a paperback or a hardcover, Amazon will tell you this could take 6 to 8 weeks to deliver to you. And if you really need the book, okay, you'll do it. But if you're just buying it on a whim, you just won't. You'll go do something else. We have seen a lot of returns. April was a brutal month because Amazon and all the bookstores they're panicking. They just threw returns at us to try and make their own balance sheets look better, which means we had to bear the brunt. Ebook sales have been fine, though. And so I think that a lot of the industry is going to change, and that some bookstores are just not going to reopen. Some of the national bookstores have already said that they're not reopening certain locations. They're just not going to do it. The bookstore industry has been teetering for a long time, and I think this is just another big strike against it. So things are going to continue to move online, which is no bad thing because it actually simplifies the process. And ebooks, like I said, are wonderful. So I certainly encourage ebooks, but print isn't going to go away. Libraries haven't been affected by COVID in the same way. Libraries, from the regular sense, they're treated like any other bookstore in that our distributor will meet with the library buyers and will pitch their favorites and the libraries will decide to buy the books that are recommended to them. So the process is very much the same with libraries as it is with bookstores. The difference is there's no returns from libraries, but it also means they order fewer copies because they only need 1 or 2. They don't need 20. So it's the process is very similar. The timelines are all the same. And libraries are funny. As a publisher, we're not allowed to have any interaction with them. It's really, really fierce in the way that they guard the librarians. Okay, I'm just gonna move along over here. So returns, let's talk about returns. What they are is that if a bookstore buys a book from a distributor, they can return the book if it doesn't sell well. So the bookstore buys the book for $15 and they will pay $15 for it. They keep it on their shelf for a while, and if it doesn't sell well, then they just send it back and they get credited $15 towards future purchases. It came out of the Depression back in the 1930s when publishers were so desperate to move product. They basically made this deal and said, look, bookstores, take it, pay us for it, and if it doesn't sell, you can return it to us for credit. And it's just never gone away. It is the bane of every publisher's existence because industry standard has a 25 to 50% return rate, which doesn't really bother the bookstores, the distributors that much, but for the publishers, we had to pay to print all of those books. And if half of them are not going to sell, then we've basically just thrown that money away. And that can be really, really hard. I'll come back to the question about self-publishing in a minute. So with returns, it's just something that publishers have to bear that risk. We do everything we can to reduce the number. We do not print extra books. Like if Barnes & Noble have ordered 500 copies of a book and all the indies together have ordered another 500 copies, so we have 1,000 orders, I'm not printing 2,000 thinking we'll sell that second 1,000 later. If they've ordered 1,000 books, I might print 1,050 because I know I'm going to be getting returns really soon. And I'm just going to recycle those returns out for ongoing sales. I can always print more if I have to, but I'm not going to sort of have an extra bulk of printing. So expectations. Here's a really good question, which I want to make very clear to everyone if you're thinking about traditionally publishing and self-publishing for that matter. How many copies will a book really sell? I remember when my first book came out, a friend of mine said, oh, that's great. So what, they're going to do an initial run of 500,000 copies and just see where it goes? No, they are not. The average mid-list traditionally published book, and I don't mean a bestseller, I mean the average book that sort of will stay on the shelves for a while, for a few years, selling 1s and 2s, the average mid-list traditional book will sell about 2,500 copies in its lifetime. That's what we can expect. So as a publisher, if we sell over 2,000 copies of a book, we're pretty happy. We've made our money back. Let's kind of pats on the back all around. If we sell over 10,000 copies of a book, well, then it's champagne and chocolate cake all around because we've just completely exceeded our expectations. The big five in New York have higher expectations, as I've discovered as an author. The big five in New York do want to see big numbers, but they still make money on the small numbers. The books that sell 2,500 copies and just keep on selling, the big publishers are sustained by that, but they're looking for the blockbuster all the time. As a small press, we're praying for a blockbuster, but we're not expecting it. So 2,500 copies is about what you can expect your book to sell. If you've sold 2,500 copies, you're right there in the sweet spot. If your traditionally published book has sold more than 2,500 copies, be proud of yourself. You've done well. I realize I'm running a little short on time. So revenue streams, real simple. As publishers, we do rely on book sales. That's how we make our money. That's how we pay our staff. Sometimes there are government grants available. Every state is different. Sometimes cities have things, but it's hard to try and run a business based on government grants. Some publishers do have what I call other revenue, where they'll produce a book, like say for an organization that wants to produce a nice big glossy book. It's basically a self-published book because the company is paying us to produce this book for them, and we'll do it. But that's not part of our traditional revenue stream. It's sort of a special project that we'll do on the side because it makes us money. And so in a sense, regular publishers dabble with self-publishing all the time. They just don't like to say it. So inside the mind of a publisher, why do we do what we do? Ultimately, it's because we love books. We all love books. And even as an author, you may think that publishers are distant and grumpy and ornery and dumb because they don't see how great your book is. Remember that we are all real people too. Some of us are authors, most of us are editors, but we love books and we love writing, and we work for the company that we work for because we like the kind of books that that publisher produces. So there is a lot of love here, and there's just an awful lot of financial stress, and it's been getting harder and harder and harder over the years, which is why it can be difficult, and why it can seem very restrictive, and why we say no a lot more than we say yes. It's not because we don't think the book is good. It's not because we don't like you. It's because ultimately, if we don't make money, we got a business, and then there's no publishing at all. So, which actually segues nicely to the question about self-publishing. Just to clarify, my writing career and my publishing career are two separate things. So I will continue to publish traditionally for so long as they'll take me. As long as my publisher still wants books from me, I will continue to traditionally publish. I may one day self-publish because it's not the same as it was 10, 15 years ago. It's actually a lot more respectable and a lot easier than it used to be. And with the new company I'm working with, Cascadia, we work with both traditional and self-published authors. So I'm fine with either. I have no problem with self-publishing. I would be happy to do it, but since I have the opportunity to traditionally publish, I will continue to do that while I can. So we'll see where the future goes. If I can make a quick plug, my new book, Winds of Mark, is coming out June 30th from Harper Voyager. So I encourage everyone to go check it out. Swashbuckling Space Pirates. And that's the end of my plug. Last, answering a couple of questions. What do publishers do with the books that are returned? We put them in the warehouse and we hope that somebody will order them one day. But after a couple of years, we basically just pulp them. We either give them away, we donate them, or we just destroy them because they're just taking up space in the warehouse. It's really sad. There's a lot of books that just get tossed because of the return system. I think I'm at the end of my time, but I'm happy to take any last questions if anyone has anything. And if anybody does have any more questions, I will just put it up here. This is my email, just ben@cascadiaauthorservices.com. If you think of any questions afterwards that you want to ask me, feel free to drop me an email, and I'm happy to answer it. I'm sort of getting out of the industry from the traditional side, but I still know an awful lot about it, and I'm happy to help out if anybody has any questions. So that's all I've got. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Coles. That was an amazing, very insightful presentation, and I appreciate you sharing your time with us through this venue. We've been trying to offer our members as much information and writing tips as we can, and your talk definitely spoke to a lot of the questions that we get within our meetings and our emails. So we really appreciate your time.
Well, thank you. I realize it's a lot of information, and a lot of it is weird because the publishing industry just is so strange. So by all means, I know we recorded this today, so hopefully people will have a chance to review it and sort of take it in a little bit more. And again, I encourage anyone, if you have any questions, just drop me an email. I'm happy to answer them. Absolutely.
Thank you so much. And to our members, this talk will be on our YouTube site in probably about a week. Our wonderful YouTube guru, Michelle, will get that up there for you. So you can go back through it. And the PowerPoint is part of the recording. So that's a really great way to be able to take a look again. So thank you so much, Mr. Coles. And to all our Southwest members and guests, we greatly appreciate you joining us today. And we hope you have a wonderful rest of your weekend. As a reminder, those of you that are part of Sarah Baker's workshop today, that'll start right at 12:30. And keep an eye on the Facebook page and on our website, as we will be having a speaker on our Tuesday meeting. We're just still setting that up. So thank you all so much. We appreciate your time. Thank you again, Mr. Coles.
Thank you very much. Have a great day, everyone.
You too. Thank